1058, 4 lines from the top, last word. Ki yikach ish ishu ve'ola, a man marries a woman, they live together. V'hoyim lo simtza chen be'einav, if she does not find favor in his eyes. Ki motza be'ervaz dover, he found something inappropriate. There are different opinions what allows for divorce. V'kasav la sefer krisus, he should write for her a document of severing. V'nasan biyoda v'shulchan mibeso, he puts it in her hand and he sends her away from her house. Now this is what's called in the Gemara, refers to this document, we never find it in the Chumash, but in the Gemara it's called a get. And that's the way a Torah divorce works, and it's the only way it works. The only way a Torah divorce works is if you give the woman a legitimate get. And what's remarkable is that the word get, the gimel tes, which is a get, nowhere in Lashon HaKodesh, in the entire Jewish Hebrew language, do you find the letter gimel and tes next to each other, except for the word get. I mean, just as they are separated everywhere else, right, they are separated here. So in Torah, it doesn't matter what, we were just talking in our other shir about Noachide law. In Noachide law, for a couple to get married, marriage in Noachide law means that a couple is understood, they make a declaration, or it's understood in the society, they are living together as husband and wife. There is no official ceremony. And the divorce in Noachide law is that husband sends her away with a declaration, you are no longer my wife. That's all it takes. The difference, because Noachides are also prohibited to commit adultery. To live with a single woman is not prohibited for a Noachide. So this woman, her status depends on what in Noachide law. In Torah law, a woman is married. Once she's married, she is not divorced until and unless a proper get is written. And a proper get is very, very tricky because the names of the get and the name of the location have to be precise names. Their entire halachic books and literature has been written on how you spell certain names. If you look at Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, for instance, in the Igros Moshe, if you look at, so for example, a man wants to divorce his wife in Ohio. So how do you spell Ohio in Lashon HaKodesh? It has to be spelled Aleph, Hey, Vav, Yud, a different, or how do you spell her name if she only has one name and it's an English name? Her name is Jennifer. How do you spell Jennifer in Lashon HaKodesh? Whatever it is. And even in the Hebrew names, sometimes there are Hebrew names that, for example, the name Pinchas. You find Pinchas written Pei Yud Nun Chaf Samech, Pinchas, sometimes with a Yud and sometimes without a Yud. And in a get, one letter that's not written correctly in a get, the get is not legitimate, number one. Number two, the get has to be given. By Torah law, a man can divorce his wife against her will. By Torah law, a man can give his wife a get and say, you're gone, or get out of here. But but rabbinic law instituted that you cannot divorce a woman against her will. Now, in order to divorce, it has to be that the man gives the wife a get. So the question that people ask, this is the point I really want to get to here, is that why, that was not intentional at all. Well, I can't say the word get anyway. Why, I get the point I want to get to here is that why is it that only a man could divorce his wife? In Torah law, only a man. In secular law, a woman could divorce her husband, or whatever it is that they do in Torah law. Only a man could divorce his wife. It's not the wife divorcing the husband. Why is that? What's the logic there? The answer is very logical, because if I own a table, the table can't go free without my, table one day gets up and says, okay, I'm Hefker. I'm Leket, I'm Hefker. I could make the table ownerless, or I could give the table away as a gift. At a marriage ceremony, gentlemen, you need to know this when you get married. When you give the wife a ring under the chuppah, and with all the ceremony, with all the pomp, and all the tears, all the bubby's tears under the end, and you can give her a ring, and there's a lot of what do you call it, music and everything. You know what's going on under a chuppah? There's a legal transaction going on under a chuppah. That's what's going on. In hard terms, there's a legal transaction. The legal transaction is you are giving her something that is worth a pruta. You're giving her a ring, symbolically, because the ring shows that you've come full cycle and now you're becoming one, and she's going to run rings around you and everything else. There's all the symbolism of a ring. They're terrific, wonderful. It's all very nice. It's all true. It's all wonderful. But at the end of the day, there's a legal transaction. You're giving her a ring, and in accepting the ring, she is, so to speak, for lack of a better word, She is transferring ownership of herself to you, which is why you have to feed her, and you have to clothe her, and you have to take care of her. Doesn't say she has to do that for you. She has other obligations. She has to cook and she has to clean, and the Mishnah talks about what a wife's domestic duties are in the home. But you have full legal responsibility for her. And it's documented how much food you have to provide her with, and how much you have to do this and that and the other thing. You have taken on the responsibility. So what's a husband called in Hebrew? Baal. What does the Baal mean? The owner. The owner. He's the owner. You own her. Well, if you took over ownership of her, by the way, that ownership is very, very deceptive, because at the end of the day, I got news for you guys, right? You are the owner in name only, right? You are the owner who is owned, right? But you have, like a woman, whatever a woman acquires, the husband automatically acquires. A woman's not allowed to spend her husband's money without his permission. If a woman's not even allowed to give, when a man knocks on the door for tzedakah, a woman cannot give more than a token amount without her husband's permission. What she owns, he owns. But it's logical, because he's got to support her. He's got the responsibility of support. So the same way that you took ownership of her legally, the same way that if you're going to release it, if she belongs to you, the release has to come from you. And therefore only the man could write a get. Now, that does create problems nowadays, where a wife has, if you go to Beis Din nowadays, a woman says, well, my husband is not treating me well, maybe he's beating her, or he's being abusive. By the way, abusive has to be also defined. You know, sometimes nowadays there's an expression called verbal abuse, right? Not every time a couple has an argument is that, oh, my husband's being abusive, right? That's not abuse, my friend. That's marriage, right? That's not abuse. I'll tell you where the line is. There's a difference between having an argument over an issue and having an argument getting personal about it. And that you should never get. That's simply a lack of decency. If you're arguing with your wife over spending money, or you're arguing with your wife over whether you should go on vacation, or you're arguing with your wife over spending money, or you're arguing with your wife about going to her parents' house for Shabbos, or you're arguing with your wife about spending money, right? So at the end of the day, stick to the issues. Just stick to the issues. Don't start talking about, well, you're foolish and you're irresponsible. Don't get personal. When you get personal, you cross that line. Now, a husband who hits his wife, the wife has a right, in our day and age, you could go to Beis Din. Let's say the husband's neglectful, or let's say the husband's unfaithful. The wife could go to Beis Din, and the Beis Din says to the husband, you have to give your wife a get. Now, the problem is that nowadays there's no way to enforce it. In the time of Sanhedrin, a man who was told to give his wife a get by the Beis Din, and he refused to give his wife a get, they would use corporal punishment, what the South Africans call caning. Right? Did you ever get caned, Eli? Or was it? It's already done. They don't do it anymore. No, it was past my time. It was okay, past your time. You missed all the fun, huh? In halacha, if a man didn't give his wife a get, so the Beis Din could tell the man, give her a get, or we're going to beat you. And if he refused to give a get, they would hit him. Now, the reason it gets complicated, because the halacha is he has to give the get willingly. So the way the halacha says is kofin oso ad sheyomer rotze ad. We force him until he says, I want to. There's a very famous, what's the obvious question? What's the obvious question? It's not really his will. It's not really his will. Yeah, sure. I'm getting beaten by a bamboo stick. I'd rather, so the man's all of a sudden, okay, I'll do it. So the Rambam, the Maimonides, he explains, you know what's really going on here? The Rambam says that every Jewish person wants to do the right thing. Remember you had fractions in high school when you did fractions, right? So there's always canceling out till you're left with the answer. You cancel out, this cancels with that cancels out, and you're left with the 1/4 and 1/8, and this cancels out, and you're left with whatever. In halacha, the man wants to do the right thing. What's stopping him from doing the right thing? His Yetzer Hara. So what we do is we cancel out the Yetzer Hara with a piece of rawhide, right? And then what are you left with? His pure goodwill. Right? So when he gives the get, he's giving the get willingly. But if you do it on your own, then it's not a valid get. So that's why nowadays if a guy, and this is a very common problem nowadays, where a husband is not treating his wife properly, the Beis Din says he has to give her a get. He says, I'll give her a get. I want $100,000 or $500,000. So the logical thing is you go to the hood and you hire a couple of thugs and you go beat up the husband until he gives a get. That's called a get me'usa. What's that?
Until he wants to.
Until he wants to, but they can't do that because it's not authorized by a Beis Din. And that's called a get me'usa. It's a forced get, which is a not valid get. It's not a valid get, and if this woman marries somebody else, she's committing adultery. The children are mamzeret. Right, that you could certainly do. If you hire somebody to kill him, so then it's not a get issue, right? But it's you're not allowed to do that according to halacha. You can't. You go to the ghetto, huh? You go to the ghetto to get the get. Yeah. The what do you call it? That's what I thought you were saying. You go to that's why it's called a ghetto. Those are the guys. No, you can't do that. It's got to be authorized by a Beis Din. There have been cases nowadays where even Beis Dins have authorized force. It's against the secular law, but Beis Dins have authorized force to get a get. But it's very, very tricky. You really can't do it according to halacha. Nowadays, you can't do it. And the only leverage that they have nowadays is that they will publicize in the community that the man is ostracized. Sometimes they'll even put up his picture all over the city that this man refuses to give his wife a get. They don't give him an aliyah. They don't let him into the thing, and the Beis Din is behind it. But there is a limit. There is a limit to the what he called. Whereas at the time of the Sanhedrin, a man could before the rabbinic law, a man could give his wife a get against her will. What are we going to ask you?
I have one question. The modern rule is that you have to have the woman's permission to formalize a get. Why would a woman want to stay in a marriage if the husband doesn't want to stay in a marriage? Why was the need for this rabbinic change?
Because there are plenty of women there. It's like asking, why would a woman? Every guy who gets married at some point, you'll see when you get married, you're going to wonder to yourself if she's so good, because you're going to be thinking she's so good when you marry her. But then the thought will flitter through your mind. Well, if she's so wonderful, why would she want to marry me? That thought's going to be there. And it's an important thought. Like, why would she want to marry me? Not only that, I always ask married men, if married men are working on, to work on yourself in marriage, because most troubles in marriage, 99% of problem in marriage is because of the husband. So I always tell married men, ask yourself one question. How would you like to be married to you? With your stinginess, your anger, your unreasonableness, your demands, how would you like to be married to you? How would you like to come home to you? Right? You're grouchy and how would you like that? Right? So a man has to work on himself. Now, women, the husband wants out, but maybe the wife likes him, or maybe she doesn't have a better option. There are many women who stay together for the kids. There are a lot of reasons why people stay together. The Gemara says more than a man wants to get married, a woman wants to be married. It's a woman's nature to want to be married. And the Gemara says a woman will marry anyone. She'll marry anyone rather than stay alone, which explains a lot of marriages, by the way. I've seen it. Why? Because the alternative was worse. I knew a couple back in the day. The husband was handsome, was from my parents' generation. The husband looked like a movie star. The wife reminded me of the witch from the Wizard of Oz. And I asked my father. They said, "Dad, how did that happen?" That it looked like a total mismatch. He said to me that was one of the big mysteries when we were growing up too. And they had a great marriage, great marriage, wonderful marriage. So you never know. You never know what works. You just never know what works. So a woman may want to stay in a marriage because the alternative is often worse, and that's fine. People find that when people get divorced, they find that they thought they solved all their problems, and they find they're out of a frying pan into a bigger frying pan. So sometimes, the Torah says that it is permissible because sometimes it's just not compatible. Sometimes Beis Din will say, we'll do everything we can to try to keep a couple together. The first approach when people want to get married is to try to keep them together. But if a Beis Din sees or a Rav sees that this just is not working over here, it's not going to work, so then that's why the Torah gives us option. But it's very much a last, the Gemara says that when a couple gets divorced, even the altar in the Beis Hamikdash cries. The Mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash cries. My own understanding is because why the altar? Why does the Gemara say the Mizbeach is crying? Because the Mizbeach represents sacrifices. In order to get married and stay married, there's no trick to get married. The trick is to stay married. And marriage requires sacrifice. I once heard a story. A guy came to a Rav, and he said to his Rav, "Listen, I'm telling my wife she's grumpy, she's grouchy. There's no freshness in a marriage. I want to get divorced." So the Rav said to him, "Listen, get divorced is a serious thing. In Judaism, we have a tradition that whenever a person has trouble, what do? You add a name. Right? If a person is sick, we add a name to daven for them. He says, maybe let's try. Listen, we have to get divorced. If you get divorced, you get divorced. But, I have an idea first. First, let's see if we add a name to your wife, what happens. So the guy's intrigued. Wow, this sounds very interesting. He says, what's your wife's name? The wife's name is Bracha. He says, okay, we're going to call her Rachel Bracha from now on. Okay? So the guy says, wow, cool. And Rav says to him, there's only one thing. It's a new name. You're going to have to get used to this new name. So what I want you to do is you're going to have to practice for a few weeks. So I want you in the morning, when you get up, I want you to say, good morning, Rachel Bracha. And after you eat lunch, I want you to say, thank you for the lunch, Rachel Bracha. And when you go to sleep at night, I want you to say, thank you, you had a wonderful day today, Rachel Bracha. Just, to practice. So the guy's talking, he's saying thank you, he's saying please, he's saying, right. 2 weeks later, he comes to Rav, unbelievable, the name changed. She's in a good mood now, she's always smiling, it's unbelievable. Sure, what happened? The guy was behaving like a boor, and now he's behaving like a mensch, so the wife is smiling, so the wife is happy. Right? But we certainly, it's a last-ditch resort. If it can't, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So there's no choice. Okay, now, take a look at the next pasuk, because it's another very bizarre concept. V'yatsa mi beso, she leaves his house. I'm in the seventh line on 1058. V'holcha v'haisa le'isha acher. She leaves his house and she marries another man. Usneya ha'isha acheron. The other guy hates her too. It sounds like a real winner. V'kasav la sefer krisus v'nasan biyada v'shulcha mi beso. And then he divorces her too. O kiyamus ha'isha acheron. Or this guy dies. That means she was divorced from Reuven, married Shimon, and then Shimon either divorced her or died, or was poisoned. Asher lakachalo leisha. Now what happens? Says the Torah, Lo yuchal bala harishon asher shechal ashuv lakach le'oso leisha. The husband can no longer marry her. Once she's been married to another man, the husband cannot remarry her. Acharei asher hu tamah ki to'eva hi lifnei Hashem. It's an abomination. For the husband to remarry his wife once she's married, so it's called an abomination. Now, I want to tell you a shocker, gentlemen. Let's say Reuven divorces his wife, Leah. She marries Shimon, she can no longer remarry Reuven, okay? Even if Shimon dies. What about if Reuven divorces Leah? They're divorced. She commits an act of immorality. She just goes and fools around. Then he is allowed to remarry her. How do you like that? Can you imagine? Why would that be? Why should that be? Can you understand what's going on here?
What do you mean by she cheats on Reuven?
No, Reuven divorced her.
Oh, I mean cheats on Shimon?
No, she didn't marry Shimon. She went to a bar. Right? She didn't marry Shimon. She just went to a bar. Picked the guy up, that's all. They had an affair, no marriage, no nothing. And then one day they decide to remarry. Okay, he wants to marry her again. Then he can marry her again. By the way, you are allowed to marry your wife who's a divorcee. There was just a case I read about. A couple was divorced for 10 years and then they remarried. It's a mitzvah, actually. It's a mitzvah for a couple to remarry if they get divorced. I know of a couple of cases like this, where a couple got divorced and then they eventually remarried. There was one.
Can you get remarried?
You can remarry as many times as you want. If a guy divorces her and remarries her, divorces her and remarries her, then
Not her. I mean, like, divorce one and get another, then get another. How many, like?
there's no limit. There's no limit. There's no limit. There is a limit, by the way. A woman who's had 3 husbands who have died cannot marry. She's called a katlanis.
Bad luck.
She's bad luck. She's a woman, according to some, it's 2 husbands that died, and even then it's a question how they died. If she married a guy and then at age 90 he died, so she's not, 90, that's about time, But if one guy fell out of a building and another guy, another guy got shot, another guy got drowned, this is a woman is bad luck. It's the concept of the Gemara. Divorce, theoretically, she can marry as many times as she wants if a guy's foolish enough to do it. A man who marries his wife, divorces her, marries her, divorces her, I think at a certain point, Beis Din intervenes and stop being an idiot. Right, but to remarry his wife once, that's even a mitzvah. And a couple just remarried. What happened was they were not religious, and they got divorced. They were very amicable all along. The husband was very involved in raising the kids, everything else. They just weren't. And then he became religious, and then she slowly became religious. 10 years later, they remarried, which is very nice. It's a beautiful thing. And I knew a couple also that it was machzir grushasa. But if she marries another man, he can't remarry her. Yet, if she has an affair with somebody, he could, which is counterintuitive, right? Exactly the opposite of what you have. Why? And the Torah calls it abomination. Why? The answer is because if you legitimize it, then you could get into legitimate wife swapping. That means Reuven is married to Leah, divorces her, and she goes and marries Shimon. And he marries Shimon's wife Rachel. Then they get divorced and they remarry their own wives. So you have Reuven. Why was he willing to do it? Because he knows he'll eventually be able to get his wife back. So him and Reuven they'll wife swap, and then they'll be able to remarry their regular wife. So the Torah says, sorry, and it's going to be legitimized. It's all kosher because he gave a get. He gave a get. Then he gave a get again, right? So it's all kosher. Whereas a woman to go and a frum woman, talk about a frum woman, she's divorced from Reuven. What's the likelihood she's going to go and commit immorality? Very, very unlikely that's going to happen. So therefore the Torah doesn't need to prohibit it. Whereas if it's legitimized and it's authorized by halacha, then you do have a concern. Then there is a concern. Therefore the Torah says that you can't do. There's a limit over here. We're not going to get into a situation of kosher wife swapping. And therefore the Torah says you're not allowed to do it. That's the halacha. Do you remember the case? The New York Yankees had this in the 1970s. Fritz Peterson and Mike Kikich. You never heard of them? Guys, where have you been? Fritz Peterson and Mike Kikich were pitchers for the New York Yankees. And one day, Fritz Peterson drove home with Mrs. Kikich, and Mike Kikich drove home with Mrs. Peterson, and then they decided to trade. They traded families. Fritz Peterson married Mrs. Kikich, and Mike Kikich married Mrs. Peterson, and they just traded. It was called like in baseball, you trade players. They traded families, and even they got booed in Yankee Stadium. Nobody liked this idea. And eventually, Mike Kikich and Mrs. Peterson, they didn't last very long. But Fritz Peterson and Mrs. Kikich are still married. The last I heard, they were still married. They had a great marriage. They had a wedding call. So it was a wife swap, right? So according to Torah, there's a concern of giving it legitimacy, and because there's a concern, and you could do everything. There's an idea of you could do everything. People see 600. There are two attitudes. There's 613 mitzvahs, or there are 613 problems. How do you view it? 613 mitzvahs or 613 problems? So Baruch Hashem, we've taken care of the problem of milk and meat. Because now you could have a cheeseburger two different ways and it's kosher. You could have a parva burger with real cheese, right? One of those impossible burgers, right? With real cheese. Or you could have a meat burger with fake cheese. Baruch Hashem, we've taken care. Now we can have cheeseburgers. We've taken care of the problem of bacon, because now they have kosher bacon. You ever seen that? Kosher, good, we take it. What's that?
Turkey bacon.
They have turkey bacon. He said with a smile, right? The beef is good. There you go. Right? We've taken care of that problem. And now we can take care of the problem of a mechitza in shul, because they have these two-way mirrors, which are not really a one-way mirror, and what you're seeing is you're not really seeing, you're only seeing an image. And what we've done is, the Torah is an obstacle course, and when the goal is to get through the obstacle course, maximize our physical, all of our life pleasures, without breaking any of the laws. That means that what we're doing is we're doing everything wrong, but it's got a hechsher. It's got a hechsher. That's not the goal of the Torah. The goal of the Torah is to learn self-control. And therefore the Torah is telling you that over here you can legitimize it. Therefore it's considered an abomination and you're not allowed to do it. Okay?
What's the way around it?
What's the way around what?
Well, you were saying like everything has a way around it.
I don't say everything has a way around it. That would be the way around it. That the Torah says don't get around it. There is no way around it because the Torah doesn't want you doing it. That's exactly the point. That's why what would be the legitimate way is not valid. That's exactly what the Torah is heading you off in the past, Nathan.
I just wonder how big of a problem this was that they had to write this in the Torah.
There were times in Jewish history, if you ever want to really learn Jewish history, gentlemen, the best way to learn Jewish history is to read the responses of the poskim, the questions that came into halachic authorities, and then you'll get a feel of what's going on in the Jewish world. So for example, if you read the response from, let's say, the Chassam Sofer or the Noda B'Yehuda from 250 years ago, then there were all sorts of questions about men who have disappeared because the Cossacks pulled them off into the forest, or a husband who refused to give his wife a get, and you get an idea what's going on. If you read the contemporary poskim like Rav Moshe Feinstein, then you're going to get questions about how do you kasher a microwave oven? Right? That didn't come up in 400 years ago. Now, if a microwave oven, could it go from milchik to fleishik? And if you read later poskim, that you're going to see about is what's it called theft on the internet. What's the official word for it? Identity. Theft of conceptual. What's it called? Intellectual property. Intellectual property theft. That's what you. So then you get an idea what's going on in the Jewish world. Because whatever is going on, so if you want to know Jewish history, so the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there was immorality. Listen, Nathan, there's a rule. When the Torah says not to do something, that means people were likely to do it. People could do it. If the Torah says don't murder, that means people are capable of murdering. It wasn't a lot, wasn't rampant, wasn't widespread. But if the Torah wouldn't have prohibited it here, to the contrary, since Jews were very moral people, but they're people who have the same desires as everybody else, they would be looking for a way possibly to legitimize it. So the Torah says there is no way to legitimize it. We'll head you off at the pass. I don't suspect that you're going to commit out and out in adultery, but we do have to suspect you're going to try to do it the kosher way. Therefore, the Torah says right off the bat, you can't do it. Okay, want to go to one more here. Take a look at, okay, this is a very remarkable, very deep concept. Take a look at Perek Chafei Pasuk Zayin.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So does making a kosher cheeseburger kind of like, are we missing the point there, basically?
Oh, so I don't want to take away anybody's fun. Page 1064. We have to know who we are as people, where our challenges are, and so on and so forth. We have enough issues which are out and out prohibitions that we have to deal with. Just be good where it's a prohibition. A guy needs to eat. A guy feels, listen, especially a guy who's a Baal Tshuva perhaps, who has lived with cheeseburger, who has had cheeseburgers, and maybe he misses it. So for a guy like that, this is certainly better than eating a cheeseburger. But for a frum Jew who's never had a cheeseburger, goes, boy, I just can't live without tasting a cheeseburger. I gotta have one of those. Okay, so I understand once in a while. You gotta know who you are as a person. There is something called, I was once at a bus stop, and there's a rabbi here from the yeshiva. I came to the bus stop, I had a candy in my mouth. A sucking candy. So I came to the bus stop, and I had a candy, and I offered him a candy. So I said, you want a candy? He said, okay. He says, yeah, you know what? No. I said, what's the problem? It's kosher. He says to me, no, I don't want it. I said, why not? He says, because I want it doesn't mean I have to have it. There is an idea of self-control. Each person has to know where he's holding. There's nothing wrong with having said that, there's nothing wrong with having a cheeseburger, a kosher cheeseburger. Just that it shouldn't become a pursuit in life. And my whole goal in life is to maximize it. Once in a while, we all want to enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that if it's not out of control. But a guy who's you can go into Shabbos. Let's take Shabbos as the classic example. You go to a Shabbos table. There's a lot of food at a Shabbos table, right? 3 times on Shabbos. There's a lot of food. What am I supposed to do? Sit there and eat like a rabbit? Right? No. You're supposed to enjoy it because enjoying the physical, that enhances our appreciation for the spiritual. And let's face it, I'm not a guy who's going to eat a kazayas of bread, and then I'm going to have 1 bite of fish just to taste it so I could say that I did, and then 1 potato out of the chol. That's not going to happen, right? So what will happen is what does happen, right, is I eat, right? But there's a difference between eating and taking no prisoners. You should eat, and you should enjoy, and you should have a second helping, and you should have the dessert. But there's a difference between eating dessert and conquering. At a certain point, it's become a pursuit for its own sake. And that's why we have a Shabbos table where food it's enjoyable. That's what we enjoy doing. And for Jews, by the way, there isn't a whole lot else besides food. Jews are not supposed to be in casinos, and Jews are not supposed to be on beaches, and they were in clubs. We're limited in what we can do. So we enjoy food, but we should enjoy the food, not that the food should take over us. I had a Rebbe used to say, eat up your cholent on Shabbos, but don't let your Shabbos get eaten up in the cholent.
Wait, we can't go to a casino?
You could go to a casino if there's a mechitza and they have a minyan for mincha. Any casinos like that? And gambling itself is problematic, right? You could go to a Hanukkah. You could go to a Hanukkah carnival where they raise money for the shul. Yeah, that's fun. And spin a dreidel. That you could do.
Pizza at Walmart, you can still go to Walmart, right?
What's that? Yeah, you could go to Walmart. Yeah, you could go. I'm just kidding about the. But you know, most casinos. I wouldn't say that people go to Walmart. I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot of people aren't going to Walmart. Pardon the expression. They're not going there to pick up people, right? I'd say that the rate of being picked up is higher in a casino and in a club than it is at a Walmart. In Walmart, all you do is pick up detergent, right? You know, so yeah, you go to casinos, but there's always what goes with it is always inappropriate behavior in all sorts of areas, and we all know it. So that's, and besides the fact that it's not, there's the environment and there's to say nothing of the fact that it's time that can be spent studying Torah. That's also another. A person who could be learning Torah and doesn't learn Torah is wasting time from Torah. So I can't say, is it usher? Is it usher? There's no halacha that you look up in Shulchan that says casinos are usher, right? But if you get the flavor of Torah, if you get the sense of what we're supposed to be doing, anybody with any Torah sense understands it's what we'll call inappropriate. I had a guy was in a bar throwing darts. From guy, he went to a bar. What, they have a drink? You have a beer, and I guess he throw darts in a bar. Sometimes people throw it even at the Target. But this guy was throwing darts at the bar, and a lady comes over to him and says, "You're an Orthodox Jew, aren't you?" He says, "Yeah." She goes, "What are you doing in a place like this?" I mean, lady, what are you doing in a place like this? That we can't ask, right? She asks, because they sense that it's inappropriate. They understand that this isn't, it's not something you're going to mention a eulogy. Oh yeah, he hit the clubs, boy. Yeah, he can really hit those clubs. It's like we all understand that's not appropriate behavior, and so there's a sense of, I just don't feel right doing this. But again, each person at their level, depending on where a person came from and what a person was doing and how much a person needs, that needs individual guidance. Okay, now, here is one of the more intriguing concepts in Torah. If you take a look, it's the bottom of page 1060, it starts at the bottom of page 1062. Ki yeshu achim yachdav, there are two brothers. Umeis echad behem. 1062, bottom line. One of the brothers is married and he died. Uben ein lo, he doesn't have a son. He didn't leave any offspring. A son or a daughter. Lo siya eshes ha-meis achutza le'ish zar, the wife is not allowed to marry somebody else. Yevama yovo aleo lekachalo le'isha v'yibma. Her brother-in-law should marry her.
What if he's already married?
One second. This is a very, very peculiar mitzvah. Because a man is not allowed to marry his brother's wife. If Reuven dies and he leaves a wife and children, Shimon is not allowed to marry his wife ever. She's off limits forever. Yet if Reuven dies and his wife they did not have any children, it's a mitzvah for his brother to marry the wife. For one of the brothers, it's called Yibum. If he doesn't want to marry her, then they go through a ceremony called Chalitza, where she removes his shoe and she spits on the floor in front of him, and now she can marry somebody else. He is off limits there for forever. But the ideal is, nowadays we don't do Yibum. Nowadays also Rabbanan put it and said, rabbinic law said Yibum because people cannot do Yibum with the right intent. Whereas by Torah law, the brother would marry her. Now, it was also practiced before the Torah was given, because you see that Yehuda had his son married the deceased brother's son, Yehuda, and then Yehuda himself married his daughter-in-law. That was called, and the Ramban says that the ancients knew the secret, that there's some sort of secret where the nearest relative marries the wife of the deceased brother if there are no children. So we need to understand what's going on here. And look at the next line. V'hoya bechor asher teled, the bechor who is born, yakum al shem echav hameis. He takes the place, literally takes the name of the deceased brother, v'lo yich mocha shemo miYisrael, and his name should not be erased. Now, he does not literally, we don't find in the case of Yibum, that the son that was born was then named after the deceased. So we have to understand what's really going on here. What does it mean he takes the name of the deceased? So, and what if he doesn't want to marry her? Let's say the brother does not want to marry the sister-in-law. So they do the chalitza ceremony. What is the chalitza ceremony? She removes his shoe in Beis Din. She removes his shoe. She spits on the floor, and she says he doesn't want to marry me, and everybody says chalutza now, chalutza now, chalutza now. And the bond that existed, she wasn't allowed to marry anybody else, The bond is now broken forever. Now she can marry another man. What's going on? So a very deep concept here. I think the Malbim, he explains like this. When a man dies without children, everybody wants to have a continuity in the world. Everybody wants to have a son. It's human nature that you want children because you feel you see your children as your continuity. A man who dies without a child, his neshama at a certain level wants a continuity in this world. The secret of Yibum is that if the brother marries the wife, the body that they produce, that child, will then have the neshama of the deceased brother. And that's why it says al shem, because the word shem, shin mem, is the two middle letters of the word neshama. Nun, shin, mem, hey, his neshama goes into the new body. Now, what if she doesn't want to marry him? So what if he doesn't want to marry her? So what happens? So then they do the shoe removal and she spits. What is that all about? Very bizarre. It's a fascinating explanation. Your neshama, the soul, is very, very delicate, does not want to be in this world. How can a neshama, which is completely spiritual, exist in a completely physical world? The neshama needs some sort of buffer. You know what the buffer is for the neshama in this world? Your body. Now, how much of a neshama do you have? Elon, how big is your neshama? You have any idea? How tall is your neshama? Tell you what, right, you're about 5, you're 6 feet tall. Your neshama, you got a 6-foot neshama. How's it been seen? How tall is your neshama? About 5'9"? You have 5'9" neshama? Wrong. Your neshama is only the bottom of our neshama. The edge of the neshama is down here. The neshama stretches all the way up to God's throne. That means how much of our neshama is in our body? Well, roughly the parallel, if I say, boy, I won't want to be in his shoes. You ever hear that expression? Oh, I won't want to be in his shoes. I mean, how much of your shoes are you in to begin with? Not much of me is in my shoes. Very little of me is in my shoes. Just the very bottom of my feet are in my shoes. But what would be if I didn't have shoes? I wouldn't be able to walk on the earth because the earth is too rough and coarse. So what the neshama, what the body is to the neshama is what a shoe is to a body. The parallel is exact. The shoe allows the body to exist on the earth, and very little of the body is in the shoe. The body allows the neshama to live on the earth, and very little of the neshama is in the body, because most of our neshama is outside of our body. So what happens if he doesn't want to provide a body for his brother's neshama? So what she does symbolically is she removes the shoe from his foot. Just like you, this shoe is being removed from your foot, you are not being willing to provide a shoe, so to speak, for your brother. You're not willing to provide a body for your brother. And then she spits on the ground. Spitting is always a symbol of disrespect. Disrespect. It's very disrespectful. Spitting in every society is disrespectful. And she's showing that he's doing something that we're critical of. But he's got the rights to do it. And once he does it, once they go through the chalitza ceremony, the bond between them is severed. Yeah, go ahead.
What if she doesn't want to marry him? Does she have a
The Beis Din tries to convince her. They do everything they can to convince her to marry him. They pressure her to marry him, but they don't. It's not a physical force. If she, at the end of the day, she refuses, there's nothing you can do. But they do pressure her. They do apply pressure to marry her. You always,
They would still do chalitza if she doesn't want to marry. She would still do the same process of chalitza.
yeah. The chalitza, she can't marry anybody else until there's a chalitza. By the way, this was a contemporary problem where you had people, let's say a woman living in America whose husband died, and she had a brother living in he had a brother, let's say he was Russian, that made it to America, and he had a brother living in the Soviet Union who couldn't get out. And it cannot be done by shlich, it can't be done by proxy. It has to be done with the person himself. That becomes a problem because you can't marry anybody until the brother does the chalitza. And there have been cases of brothers who are secular who are just not interested in doing chalitza, and Rabbanim had to convince them to do it in order to release this woman.
But I thought you said chalitza wasn't done in contemporary times.
Yibum wasn't done. The marriage itself wasn't done. The chalitza has to be done.
Still
Chalitza is still done, yeah.
We're still required by...
Chalitza is still required. It's a Torah law that one or the other has to be done. There's a rabbinic. The rabbi said you can't marry her because people don't marry with the right intent.
So all chalitza needs to be done in every situation.
Yeah, in any situation like this, chalitza needs to be. And there have been tragic cases, by the way, where a woman in a couple gets from the world. A woman gets married, and the husband, she marries a guy. And the husband is 24 years old, and he gets sick and he dies, and he's got a younger brother who's 3 or 5.
Why can't he do it?
Because he's got to be 13, and she has to wait 8 years or 10 years in order for the chalitza to take place. And there's nothing it could be done. Nothing can be done.
She's forbidden to any relationship.
Forbidden to get married until the younger brother gets married.
Forbidden to relations, obviously.
Yeah.
So wasn't there this case in the Torah of like, I don't remember exactly who it was, but somebody died and then
Yehuda's son, the first son died, and he had a second son marry her.
But wasn't it like the whole splitting seed thing where they like all the brothers died because they refused to like actually consummate the marriage with her?
There was Yehuda's sons, Yehuda's 2 sons.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
So why didn't they just do? Why did they all die instead of what? Like,
That's a different section of the Torah. That's not why they died is a different reason.
I don't know why they did, but like, why didn't they just do this if they really didn't want to get married to her?
So it's a different thing. Whatever, that's a completely different section. That's a different thing. Yeah, Miguel?
Why was the brother-in-law allowed to pass on a mitzvah?
Why is he allowed to pass on the mitzvah? Because why is he allowed to pass on the mitzvah? It's very difficult to say. I don't have an answer for that. The Torah, by law, gives him the option. He should do it. He should do it. Not only that, let's say there are 4 brothers. The oldest brother is the first choice. The older brother could say, I'm not interested in doing either. Let the next brother do it. And if it comes all the way around, then eventually they'll say to the older brother, okay, that's it, pass or play. It's up to you. But the Torah gives him that choice. That I don't know. Why did the Torah give him the choice? I don't know. But it is certainly recommended that he's supposed to do the mitzvah the proper way at the time when the Torah was given. But then the Rabbanan put an end to it. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.